Good evening. Thank you for being here and welcome to the 6th installment of Civil Counterpoints, a campus conversation series here at Texas Tech University. Tonight, our expert guests and you, members of the audience, along with those following us on social media, will discuss global disorder, the U.S. role in international affairs. My name is Sean Cunningham. I'm Associate Professor of History in the College of Arts and Sciences. It's my honor to be a part of this series and to do what I can to promote civility and dialogue at Texas Tech University. As most of you know, Civil Counterpoints encourages open discussion on controversial and divisive topics and the potential impacts these issues have on our community. Tonight, our moderator, Professor Jorge Ramirez from the Texas Tech School of Law, will guide our conversation, at times incorporating questions from the audience, while also navigating the discussion through a series of predetermined and related topics. We invite you to participate in this conversation by tweeting your questions and comments to hashtag TTUBCivil, and if you're going to do that, please make sure that your public profile, or that your profile is public. Or when we open up for questions on the floor, we'll have a couple of microphones set up here, and you can step to those when the moderator calls for those opportunities. And so we do encourage active participation. Please also know that everyone here is invited to join us for refreshments in the courtyard just outside these doors after the program concludes, at which time our expert guests will be delighted to meet you and to continue our civil conversations. I'd also like to acknowledge tonight the generous support provided for this series from several entities on campus, including especially the Office of the President, the Division of Undergraduate Education and Student Affairs, Student Union and Activities, the Honors College, and KTTZ TV. At this time, I'd like to request that everyone please silence all mobile and other electronic devices. And now finally, before I turn things over to Professor Ramirez, it's my honor and privilege to introduce the Provost of Texas Tech University, Dr. Michael Gallion, will provide a few additional words of welcome and introduction. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Gallion.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's my pleasure to be here this evening and to welcome you on behalf of the University Administration. Unfortunately, for all of the past 5, I guess, if this is the 6th, I've been out of town, so I've not had the opportunity to participate in these conversations. I'm very thankful that I work at a university where civil conversations about challenging issues is something that we consider a value. I think that's very important that we are that type of university, that type of environment in which students and faculty can collaborate with each other and converse with each other. In the 50-plus years that I have been at least paying some attention to the U.S. political and social discourse, I think we've had some times when civility has been set aside. I can certainly remember that during the Vietnam era. I can remember that with respect to discussions about race relations over the years. I can remember that with respect to a number of other times that you all probably can think about as well. But in my history of 50-plus years of doing that, I can't remember a time in which our discourse has been less civil than it is at this point in time. Too often in our country, we seem to consider those who disagree with us to be our enemy, someone who is perhaps less than human, and certainly someone who we might just consider evil. I think that's a paradigm that we need to very rapidly change in this country, and this type of event is one way that we can hopefully achieve that. We need to be able to return to a time when we can have civil disagreements and discussions about very challenging issues, because we have no shortage of challenging issues. So again, welcome you on behalf of the University Administration. It's my pleasure to be here. The program tonight, of course, deals with, as Sean said, global disorder, our role as a country in international relations. Certainly the current administration is operating in a different mode than previous ones, in a more nationalistic mode. For those of us in the agricultural world, my background is animal science, so agriculture, and for that world, trade issues are very, very important. And I'm sure some of the discussion tonight may center on the trade policies of the current administration and how they differ from the past and what they're achieving or not achieving. But certainly it's an area of significant discussion within my community in terms of the policies and the role of the U.S. in these kinds of international affairs. And there are many other international issues, obviously, that are relevant to the point of the topic tonight. So again, thank you for being here. And at this point, we'll turn it over to Professor Ramirez. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Provost Gallion, for those supportive and very instructive opening remarks. And welcome to everybody here, and welcome to those of you who are joining us later on television. As I was speaking earlier today with our expert guests, we were talking about the fact that tonight's discussion could be an entire course, a semester-long course, and we were talking about how we're going to discuss this particular issue in the short hour and the 30 minutes that we have, but we're gonna do our best. And I'd like to start off by saying, before I introduce the candidates, we've already talked about this, that as a candidate, President Trump emphasized that if elected, his administration would follow an America First agenda, and he's followed through with that. If you followed last week when he was at the United Nations, he really did follow through with that promise. Among other things, he said, we're standing up for Americans and the American people. He said that we reject the ideology of globalism and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism. So we're going to talk about that America First agenda tonight, and that is whether or not that America First policy brings about a global order, a global disorder, or perhaps a global disorder meant to bring about global order. So with us we have four experts tonight who have generously given of their time. First, I'd like to introduce Colonel David Lewis over here on my left, your right. He's a retired Air Force officer who serves as the director of the Strategic Studies Graduate Program here at the university, which is part of the Institute for Peace and Conflict. At my direct right here is Dr. Robert Murphy, who's research assistant professor at the Free Market Institute here at Texas Tech. To my immediate left is Dr. Jamie Bologna-Pavlik, who's assistant professor of agriculture and applied economics in the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources. And finally, we have a special guest with us tonight, Mr. Mark Tokola, who is the vice president of the Korea Economic Institute of America in Washington, D.C. And because Mr. Tokola isn't necessarily a member of our immediate family, I'm going to give a little bit of a longer introduction for him. He's retired as a U.S. Senior Foreign Service Officer with the rank of Minister Counselor in September of 2014. His last posting was as a Minister Counselor for Political Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in London. He's also served as the Deputy Chief of Mission at the American embassies in Seoul, South Korea, Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, and Reykjavik, Iceland. Other postings included the U.S. Mission to the European Union in Brussels, Minister Counselor for Economic Affairs at the Embassy in London, Economic Counselor at the U.S. Embassy at The Hague, and the Director of the Iraq Transition Assistance Office in Baghdad from 2007 to 2008. Ambassador Tokola received the State Department's Superior Honor Award for his work on implementing the Dayton Peace Accords while serving as a political counselor in Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina from 97 to 99. He holds a BA in International Relations and a Master of Laws in European Community Law. We're happy to have all of you with us here tonight, and we welcome those of you in the audience as well as those who are joining the broadcast in the future. And as already explained, we will open up the program to questions later. We're going to have two short segments in which we'll have a discussion here on the panel, and then I believe there'll be a microphone out here. And as also stated earlier, we're going to be taking Twitter questions. So if you see me looking at my phone from time to time, I'm not checking on my likes on Facebook or anything like that. So with that, our first topic will be on international trade. right, which has been in the news as of last night, midnight. If you're watching at midnight, the new NAFTA 2.0, or as it's going to be renamed, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, was released last night at midnight. And after World War II, the United States took the lead in establishing this world economic order that, in some sense, not just sought to rebuild the war-torn nations after World War II, but also to establish an international economic order, that would provide a means to resolve economic disputes that occurred. And among the organizations that emerged from that was the World Trade Organization. And the appellate body of the World Trade Organization has been having some troubles lately because the president has refused to allow replacement appointments of judges to seats on this appellate body that would help to resolve international trade issues that have come to the fore. And in fact, President Trump has threatened to withdraw from the World Trade Organization. So I'd like to start off with a question for Dr. Murphy. Dr. Murphy, given that President Trump has at least threatened to withdraw from the WTO, wouldn't his withdrawal from the WTO strike, in some sense, a blow towards the post-World War II order that we helped to establish in order to find some alternatives to use of force in deciding disputes, whether they be trade or other kinds of disputes, for the enforcement of perceived rights, particularly in foreign trade?
Well, yes, I think I generally agree with your question. Would say yes, that is true. Just for some background, tariff rates, like the taxes that governments impose on imports from other countries, those had been much higher. And then, yes, in the post-World War II era, those have typically been much lower. So in that respect, you could say if the goal is free trade, and most economists think that's a default goal to go towards, that makes everybody per capita richer, then yes, President Trump sort of threatening to perhaps flippantly pull out of the WTO, that would cause alarm. Let me just mention, though, that I can see, just to be clear, the way President Trump explains his views on trade, I think it does not line up well with standard theory, so I'm not endorsing the way he might justify these moves, but I do think that there is something to be said for people who are concerned about joining international organizations and sort of ceding U.S. sovereignty. So if you want to have free trade, it would be pretty easy just to have a very index card saying we're going to have zero tariffs. So, but these agreements are actually hundreds of pages long, if not more than 1,000. So some critics could plausibly say that this is about harmonizing regulations and things, and it giving up what Congress ought to be doing instead to an international body. So I do see the connection within America first, but I definitely agree that the way President Trump is justifying these moves, most economists would say that that's not really a good argument.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Bolognia-Pavlik, as history would have it, NAFTA and WTO were being negotiated simultaneously in the mid-1990s, so they share a lot of aspects in common. Therefore, it's not really surprising that we saw President Trump criticize NAFTA as well as the WTO. But given that more than 45% of our goods here in Texas go either to Mexico or Canada, do you think that his aggressive approach to the renegotiation of NAFTA, and in a sense, this application of an America First agenda, do you think that that could backfire, particularly when we consider that Mexico has an incoming leftist government in December, and maybe also given the frustration that Canada has shown in this renegotiating process?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this a couple ways. First, I want to talk about just renegotiating trade in general from an economist perspective, which builds off a little bit what Bob was saying. But because our topic is global order, I do want to emphasize economists like trade and I'll get to the NAFTA agreement that all just changed last night, but because economists always say trade increases wealth, one thing that gets overlooked a little bit is the fact that trade makes people work together. It connects people from all across the globe in ways that we just don't even think about. Markets are crazy, right? One of my favorite examples in my classes that I teach are roses on Valentine's Day in the Northeast. We get them from somewhere. A lot of them come from Kenya. So we're connecting people and encouraging these interactions that we never thought of before. So that's one of the reasons trade is really important to encouraging a global order. As for the NAFTA renegotiations, everything just changed last night, so everything's very new, so I can't give you too many details on exactly what the policy changes were, but what I can say is some experts have some issues with how we got there. There's some experts that think we could have gotten similar trade renegotiations without really angering Canada. Luckily, we got that done. Actually, as of Friday, it wasn't clear that Canada was going to agree, but we did get it done. So those are other things that we're going to find out in the future.
Right. And Colonel Lewis, the WTO and its dispute resolution body in particular were created to diffuse conflicts, right, by providing a peaceful means by which to resolve trade disputes. Could a trade war escalate tensions and lead to international frictions that might ignite new and expanding aggressions? Are we inadvertently, in some sense, through our trade wars, particularly with China, driving maybe some of our foes closer together? And here I'm thinking of Russia and China. Are we driving them, in some sense, closer together in a natural alliance by engaging in these trade wars?
It's an interesting question, and if I could predict the future on that, I'd be a rich man and wouldn't be sitting here. However, first of all, can I object to the term trade war as somebody who's been in war? I hate that term. Clausewitz would tell us that war is an extension of politics, and I think in some ways we in America tend to think of war as a failure of politics, and we forget about all of our elements of national power when we do that. When it comes to driving people into various camps, yes, potentially. However, I think China and Russia making natural bedfellows in unnatural political times, perhaps. Russia does not have the GDP necessarily that China needs to be a huge partner, and a common enemy doesn't necessarily make for good coalition partners either. So, yes, we might be driving things that direction. However, I think we should also remember that largely misinterpreted by many people, America first doesn't mean America only, and I think that gets misinterpreted, and I'd like to follow up on that after a while.
Great, thank you very much. And that's a good point that you make regarding the use of terms. I just recently read parts of Dean Acheson's President at the Creation, and one of the things he said was that the military, the Department of Defense and the Department of State always had, there was the view from the Department of Defense and the view from the Department of State, and Acheson said, we always try to have the same policy and sort of the same language. So let me go to Ambassador Tokola, looking at you with your experiences in Asia. I'd like to ask you to address the President's escalating trade differences with China. Did the President miss an opportunity to hold China in check when he withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership that some argue at least would have helped us to establish better and stronger relations with our allies in the Pacific Rim, and perhaps given us a stronger say, for instance, in territorial disputes like the South China Sea?
Okay, let me get to that, but first let me say a word about the changes to NAFTA.
Yeah.
I spent the morning trying to see what actually happened. And what it looks like, at first blush, is we have slightly better access for dairy exports to Canada. It looks like the content for cars, so they can qualify, goes from 63% domestic to 75% domestic, except trucks are excluded. So what this looks like are modest improvements, and they're improvements. These are good things for America. It does not look like tearing up the worst deal ever negotiated and replacing it with a brand new wonderful agreement. It looks like modest improvements. We should welcome that. We shouldn't fall for the idea this is a brand new agreement. On the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I went to hear the U.S. Naval Admiral in charge of the U.S. Pacific Fleet give a talk in 2016, Admiral Scott Swift. And during the question and answer, one of the questioners asked the Admiral, what is your biggest strategic worry in the Pacific? And Admiral Swift said, my biggest worry is that we will not go through the TPP. That's what worried him the most, because he said that his counterparts in the Asian countries were using the TPP as an example of whether the U.S. was really committed to Asia or not. They took it as being a very important symbol, and it's bad news. We backed away from it. The TPP in itself was a good deal. If you talk about the problems we see in trade today, the next round of trade issues, intellectual property theft, labor standards, behavior of state-owned corporations, the ability of U.S. companies to invest overseas, all those things we say are problems were covered by the TPP. That's what it was for. Now we've backed away from that. So I think we're taking a loss for not being part of it. And far from killing the agreement, what's happened now is all the other countries are going ahead with it without us. So it's already been signed by the other 10 countries, now 11 plus South Korea. And then once they ratify it, probably by the end of this year, if not early spring, it'll go into effect with us on the outside. So this is not a good thing.
Okay. Does anybody else want to comment on the trade issues?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please do. Please do.
I just want to add one more point about WTO.
Yes, please do.
It seems odd to be pulling away from the WTO. This is an organization that we largely created. The rules are rules that we wrote for it. We win 90% of our cases in WTO. Why would you not want to have that forum?
Right. And for those of you who haven't quite studied this, right, the World Trade Organization is the really it emerged from the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade right after World War II. And again, the purpose of GATT and later the WTO, again, was to provide nations of the world a dispute resolution process to resolve trade disputes so that we didn't have to go to war. I mean, in some sense, this was to prevent us or help us from having to deal with a third world war. So again, the whole, and the United States, as Ambassador Tokola said, was one of the major creators of this new multilateral organization that would keep the world safe and really has kept the world safe for the past 50 years or more. And so the question is, or at least the theme that we're talking about is, has President Trump's America First policy in some sense led to the dismantling of this multilateral process to the danger of U.S. American interests, or is it really just the United States standing up for itself and demanding respect from other nations of the world? Go ahead, Colonel Lewis.
Yeah, just comment. I'm not an expert on the WTO, so I went on their website and hunted around and started looking at things, and it seems to me, please correct me, somebody, if I'm wrong, most of the disputes seem to be between the EU and the United States. Very few disputes registered from China or from Russia against the United States in particular. So it's quite interesting. I don't see us going to war with the EU, but there certainly is a bigger problem associated with lack of a forum to be able to discuss your disputes.
Could I just make?
Yes.
Yeah, I just had two observations just to help people who are new to this understand some of these terms could be misleading. So as he mentioned, a lot of these disputes. Well, actually, in light of both of the comments from the panel, notice it wasn't like under NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, that there were zero tariffs. There were various things. So it's that phrase, just like with a lot of legislation, the title doesn't necessarily convey the common sense meaning of what it was. And so some people do object to these things by saying, look, if you want free trade, you could get it very quickly. This is more managed trade. And then also the thing that's odd about these reciprocal things, so like the WTO might say, okay, if this country does this to you, then you're allowed to do this back to them. And so the spirit, the idea is to limit it, but just keep in mind when it comes to, again, the standard economist case for free trade, it's a unilateral case. So in other words, regardless of what the rest of the world is doing, Americans are poorer if our government puts tariffs in place, or we're richer if we have free trade. So it's not really It's not like it's an arms control agreement where like a chemical weapons ban where, oh, our troops would benefit if we could use these, but we don't want them reciprocating, so let's just agree we're not going to use. Tariffs aren't like that. If we impose a tariff on China, that actually makes Americans poor on net also, at least the standard economics textbook treatment. So yes, it hurts them, and so maybe by threatening it, they'll back down, but it's an odd thing where we're threatening the world that we're going to do something that makes us poor. So just keep that in mind also.
Let me chime in with one more point. It's kind of a big point. There's two different trade issues that get confused all the time. There's the issue of countries engaging in unfair trade practices. And if they do that, we have the means to go after them. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. We win our cases in the WTO, and we win those cases. But that's a very small proportion of trade. The reason we've got a big trade deficit in the United States is not because other countries are cheating. Almost all trade, 90% plus, is just normal business. There's no cheating going on, there's no disputes. Disputes are a small part of what goes on. What causes a big trade deficit is our economy as a whole. It's our interest rates, our savings, it's our educational system, it's our infrastructure, it's our productivity. All those things make a trade deficit. So if we're trying to solve the trade deficit problem, we should be looking in the mirror, not trying to think other countries are cheating. They do, but that's a small part of trade.
Okay. And I'm going to go continue. I'm going to move on to topic 2, and that topic includes global climate change debate. Hurricane Florence inundated eastern North Carolina last month with more than 30 inches of rain, which was an all-time record for the state. Last year, Hurricane Harvey stalled over Houston and dumped more than 60 inches of rain, an all-time record for the U.S. We see deadly heat waves across the nation. Unprecedented wildfires in the West are becoming the norm. It appears as though these kinds of storms will become the norm for the rest of our lives. The United States played a major role in the development of the Paris Agreement on climate change, but President Trump announced that the U.S. would withdraw from that particular treaty. The administration last week released an environmental impact statement, which in some sense I think almost is the Trump administration throwing up their hands because in the defense of freezing federal fuel efficiency standards for light trucks and cars, they're saying that global temperatures will rise by 7 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100, and basically that these standards would have no impact on that. So in some sense, they were saying there's nothing we can do about it. Our fate is in some sense sealed, so let's not impact American manufacturing by trying to impose additional regulations. Dr. Murphy, this reminds me of an old saying that it's better to light a single candle than curse the darkness. The Paris Agreement was certainly criticized for being toothless in the sense that it didn't provide any real enforcement. There was really no real obligations imposed upon the nations other than the obligations they imposed on themselves. But if this is the case, why do you think the Trump administration found it necessary to withdraw? It doesn't seem like we were going to lose anything. And in doing so, in withdrawing, we're kind of revisiting that theme of pulling out of the multilateral system and trying to go it alone. Wouldn't we have been better to stay in the agreement and at least have some impact internationally with regard to where the world's going with climate control issues?
Okay, so I realize we want to have time for everyone to jump in here, so I'll try to be really brief. So on this one, so most of the things what we've talked about and what we're going to be talking about, yeah, I disagree pretty strongly with the Trump administration's rationale. On this particular topic, though, I think what they're saying makes sense. So just to, again, for those who are unfamiliar, so the Paris Climate Agreement, all the countries of the world that many have joined, and they sort of make a pledge about this is how much we're going to reduce our emissions, and there's no real penalty within the agreement if you don't live up to that pledge. And so when President Trump announced, hey, you know, the U.S. isn't getting anything else, we're going to pull out, one objection that he summarized was to say, well, why not just stay in it because nothing bad's going to happen even if we don't hit the target. But to me, that just my opinion, that seems odd that we're going to stay in something that we know we're not going to live up to. To me, it would seem more straightforward if we have no intention of hitting that target to just be honest about it and say we're pulling out. The other thing, regardless of how you feel about that particular issue, just so you know, other groups that are very much, in favor of aggressive action to limit emissions, they are telling people that if you look at all the pledges that have been made by the signatories of this agreement, the limit is supposed to, the target, we're trying to limit emissions to at most 2 degrees Celsius. And if you look at what all the pledges are, even if all the governments of the world lived up to them, they still project that global warming would be 3.2 C. So the point is, even if everyone did it, it's not coming close to hitting what the ostensible target is. And so I do, on this one, sort of agree with the cynics who are saying this is all a big show, and this isn't going to solve the problem even on its own terms. And so if there really are no penalties, aren't we being more straightforward just by saying we're not doing this?
And I'm actually going to go to a quick Twitter question because it's related to what we've been talking about. So this first Twitter question says, if we continue to pull out of agreements, treaties, or alliances, as we've been talking about, at least with threats to get out of the WTO, NAFTA, and withdrawal certainly from the Paris Climate Accord, this person is asking, does the United States forfeit its voice as a global leader? Or is the U.S. truly so large it cannot be ignored? So, so are we forfeiting our voice as a global leader if we don't participate in that? What do you all think? Go ahead.
I'm going to say no, we're not forfeiting our voice. In fact, if you read the most recent national security strategy that is put out, it's not in opposition to multilateralism. It says we need to be a better leader with our American interests out front. And so given the size of who we are and what we do and the inheritor of the world post-Cold War, I think our leadership still exists there. I don't think we abscond with anything. I don't think we give up anything necessarily as well.
Mm-hmm. And this is a good point. I think one of the things that Trump is saying is we do need to be a leader, and so he's taking actions in some sense to saying we're taking a lead in the international regime. But he's also said the main goal of that leadership, though, is to make sure that American interests are first and foremost. What would can we describe the interest of American interest as interests in an international multilateral system? That is, might that not also be in the interest of the United States to have a strong multilateral system? What do you all think?
In fact, that's what the national security strategy actually says. Almost those words exactly, that we do need to be a leader. And so back to the peace through strength, I think what they are doing, I think Dr. Nadia Shadlow wrote this national security strategy and basically rejecting the governance aspect and international governance aspect. I don't think anybody's disputing globalization. I think we confuse globalism with globalization. And I think the issue is the governance aspect. Should we give up our self-governance, our constitutional protections as we see them, for international governance? And I think that's where the rub is for the most part. When I read through that thing when it was released in 2017, in fact, while President Trump was in Europe meeting with NATO in the spring of 2017, his national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, was out there saying America first does not mean America alone, and working very hard to try to dispel that perspective.
Ambassador Tokola, what is your view on that? That at least in some sense, doesn't being a leader in the international realm mean that we have to depend upon international law and not domestic law, or that is not have the interest of any particular sovereign in mind? I mean, President Trump has basically said we need to pursue multilateralism, but it has to be multilateralism in the interest of the United States. Well, couldn't the 192 nations of the world say the same thing, and we really wouldn't end up with something international, or would we?
Complex series of questions there. I guess my first point would be there is no danger of international governance superseding American sovereignty. The world we live in is a world of sovereign nations. Every organization is based on the idea their membership is sovereign countries. So sometimes countries agree to cooperate inside an organization, and sometimes they'll even allow for dispute settlement, but no one gives up sovereignty. So I think it's a straw man to worry about whether or not we're going to come under some international global system. No one's even advocating that. I think it's not true. On the Paris Accord specifically, I'm not that worried about not signing it, because we've got a long tradition of the United States not signing international agreements. One of the reasons we don't is because we actually believe we sign them, we have to live up to them. We're very self-critical to make sure that we adhere to what we sign. We never signed the General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, the GATT. We never ratified that. We never ratified the Law of the Sea. We're not a member. We never ratified the Kyoto Protocol. We don't belong to that. So we have a tradition of not signing agreements. What we do is we adhere to what the agreements call for. So in the GATT, we went to the system and we followed it. Law of the Sea, we say as a matter of policy, do we adhere to the Law of the Sea, even though we don't belong to it? And the Kyoto Protocols, which is about CO2 emissions too, we didn't sign it, but we actually outperformed what would have been required of us. So don't look to whether or not we are signing agreements or not signing them. Look to what we actually do. You know, I tell my European friends, if you want to look at climate change, if you're criticizing the United States, your criticism is based on American science. The numbers you're using are numbers we produced. The criticism you're using against us is our criticism. So we are the leading country on climate change improvements. And it's not just the federal government. Cities, states, consumers, Americans have made a decision that they want to reduce carbon emissions. So we're doing it, regardless of what the federal government might say.
Right. Yes, please go ahead.
Just to piggyback on that, it is ironic that I don't have the exact figures at my hand, but the U.S. in terms of reducing emissions relative to the original trajectory has done very well, better than a lot of the other the official signatories. And part of it, again, it wasn't like an official policy. It was just like with the fracking boom, the switch to natural gas, which it emits less than coal does as far as electricity generation. So things like that. And also another quirk in all of this is my understanding is the reason it's the Paris Agreement rather than the Paris Treaty is that if it were a treaty, then it would have to be confirmed by the Senate or ratified by the Senate, and they didn't want to do that because they were afraid the Republicans wouldn't go for it. So there's a lot of ins and outs here in terms of the politics of it as well. But yeah, I definitely agree with those sentiments.
And Dr. Bologna-Pavlik, let me turn to you. I'm certain that center-right politicians who support free markets and perhaps would be against regulations like environmental regulations must have an appreciation for the need to make efforts to continue to reduce carbon emissions, as both Ambassador Tokola and Dr. Murphy have stated. We're certainly pursuing that. But what are the other changes do center-right economists and politicians recommend with regard to improving the environment in the future and dealing with climate change issues?
That's a great question and an in-depth one, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. But what Dr. Murphy just said actually kind of leads into one of the general answers from free market economists and people that believe in markets in general, is that a lot of pollution reduction comes in the form of just becoming a developed country. The United States has been able to do that because we can afford to. So that's not a very good policy just to say become developed, but one of the primary tools to become a developed nation is to use markets, and the market system is very effective in doing that. With specific policies, it kind of goes back to understanding a little bit behind the textbook environmental model and something you would learn in a principles of economics class, where basically the assumption is that we have externalities. Firms pollute because they don't have to pay for the costs. They don't have to internalize the cost of actually polluting something like a river. And so what the traditional solution would be for that is something like a tax. But the issue that free market economists have with that is that the government can't possibly know what to tax there to make it more efficient. It's possible that things become worse. So most of their arguments deal with knowledge problems. Right, so the government might not have the knowledge to actually correct the climate change and the different pollution that is causing the climate change. So what I've seen happen from the free market economists, kind of their policy solutions and suggestions have been kind of borrowing from the market system, but having regulation from that. So something like tradable pollution permits, which Dr. Murphy can talk a little bit more about the specific policies than I can. But the basic idea would be to use the idea that markets are really efficient in normal things, so why not make a market for polluting? That way we get the reduction we want as efficiently as possible. The whole idea of everything we do is try to change the incentives so people do it themselves, and we can use the individual knowledge that the government might not be able to possess.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bologna-Pavlik. One of the things that I encourage in my classes are questions. We've already taken up about almost 45 minutes of time and haven't taken any questions from the audience. I'm sure there are some questions. I want to invite, does anyone in the audience want to come up to the microphone and ask a question? We want to go ahead and do that now. But it's best if you come to the microphone because it's being recorded on television. So if you'll come up and ask your questions, we'll take some questions right now.
Professor Ramirez, we know each other, but I'm really glad that I don't know whether it's a coincidence, Alisa, I don't know. It's exactly when the economic order is shifting, you have organized this talk, so thanks to you all. But one thing, Jorge, we miss is all politics is local. You know, I'm not an economist, I'm not a political scientist, but I'm a cotton researcher. 20 years I have been in this area. So it puts people, particularly high plains producers, in a dilemma. See, morally, socially, they are towards what this administration is for. Particularly when you're talking about a commodity that gives them bread and butter, cotton, which goes predominantly to Vietnam, Turkey, China. This tariff, they are not able to reconcile this. You know, the government has to come and do, you're talking about WTO, the government has to come and do some kind of an assistance program. The technical term is MFP, Market Facilitation Program, to do that. So how do they reconcile? They're socially, morally, and other policies, they are inclined towards this administration, but what this economic order is doing is they have to live, right? Everything depends on the pocketbook. So nobody seems, particularly for us at Texas Tech, that's what it is. So we are here because of cotton. You see the seal on our seal, cotton seal. So how do, as a local man, as a local producer, take this macro picture and make it in such a way that it's going to be of something which I like, although my leanings are towards this government when it comes to what I do as a man, what I do as a family, what I do as a religion. So that picture, because Darren Hudson says, long term, this is going to hurt, but unless otherwise the government comes up with, that begs the question that we are going to create a new disorder with WTO
Right.
situations.
So that's a really good question. I think it's something, Dr. Murphy, that you referred to at least, that there are impacts to the tariffs that we impose. First of all, if we're imposing tariffs on Chinese goods, we're increasing in some sense, well, not in some sense, we are increasing the cost to consumers, but this question refers to the reaction that China might have in imposing tariffs against goods that we're shipping out like cotton. And so what is the impact on the actual American? Somebody has to pay the price for these tariffs, right? Either you're a consumer paying higher prices for the tariffs, or you're having to take on the burden of the retaliation tariffs, right? Because China has come back and imposed tariffs on, well, not only China, the European Union, Mexico, Canada, China have all imposed tariffs on American goods shipping out. And so the question is, how does the farmer in the United States sort of reconcile this idea that maybe they're in support of the general America First policies, but not necessarily ready to take on the price or the burden? So I looked at you, but I'll leave it open to anyone who wants to answer the question.
Sure, so I can jump in real fast. So it's certainly correct, and this ties into what I was saying earlier. It's certainly true that if the U.S. government levies a tariff against some other country and then they reciprocate by levying a tariff, everybody can see, that maybe that is a bad move on our part, and they can see the pain that causes. But again, I want to stress, even though that's certainly true, even if the other country didn't retaliate, the levying of the tariff per se does make Americans as a whole poorer, at least again, the standard economics analysis. But the difference is it's spread out among all the consumers, because a tariff is just a tax, on imports. And so it's funny to see Republicans nowadays, some of them championing, normally they don't say, let's tax to make America great again, let's raise taxes on U.S. people. So, but yet that's what they're saying implicitly here. But the difference is, though, that, a tariff, it tends to benefit, the domestic producers, and it's a very concentrated benefit. So they stand to gain a lot if a tariff keeps out foreign imports, whereas it's just American consumers in general who might have to pay a little bit higher prices. So in terms of just feeling the pain and sort of concentrating the mind, if the foreigners levy a reciprocal tariff, then there's a very concentrated pocket of people who get hit hard that might raise a fuss. So certainly that you see that dynamic, but again, I'm concerned the way this is often phrased in terms of the public. It's that they think the one downside of levying a tariff is they might reciprocate, but even if they didn't, that the standard economic case is that's still making us poorer, so it's not a great strategy.
Yeah, I'm getting on thin ice talking about tariffs in front of real economists, but I'll try it. I'm speaking as an old trade negotiator. I spent 3 years in special trade activities. And a tariff is a tax. That's a fundamental point. It's not the Chinese government that pays tariffs. It's not the Chinese companies that pay tariffs. It's American consumers that pay the tariff on the good coming in. If our goal is to support the American auto or steel or aluminum industries, and that may be a legitimate goal, it'd be far more efficient just to write them a check and tell the American voters, we're going to tax you more and give that money to companies that we think are important. That'd be an honest approach. But doing it by tariffs is disguising the fact this is a transfer to industries we think are important.
Yeah, I think the question, it's a very complicated question, just given the economics of the situation, but it is a question that all of you need to consider. What are the impacts, and who gets impacted by these taxes, and who ultimately pays that tax? It's either going to be the consumer or the U.S. government. And in some sense, it is the U.S. government already, who's already designated $12 billion in relief to U.S. farmers for retaliation tariffs. So in some sense, we're all paying for it through that $12 billion that's already going to farmers.
Now, let me sneak in one footnote. One of the reasons for tariffs is supposed to be that American companies operating overseas will then come back because they'll avoid the tariffs and just repatriate the United States. There was a study just done by the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. They polled 450 American companies operating in China, and they asked them the question, because of tariffs, would you reconsider moving your manufacturing base? So out of 450 American companies, 65% said they would not move, regardless of tariffs. 6% said they'd think about coming back to the United States. And all the rest said if tariffs hit China, they'll move to India or Southeast Asia. So they're not going to have the effect of bringing companies back here.
Could I touch that one real quickly here? There's a lot of parallels, I think, in the military operations as to what we're trying to accomplish here, and that is the ever-elusive, quick, decisive victory, right? We can make this happen. We can get China to cave very quickly. I say ever-elusive because they rarely are quick, nor are they decisive, and which could be the case in this dispute as well. You have the case of isolating your enemy, which I think we're working very hard to shore up with the EU, certainly with this USMCA. There's not a Y in there somewhere, but okay.
Yeah.
But somehow you put this coalition together, isolate your enemy, and then you got to pay incremental dividends back to people, which is what I think the money's set aside to be able to help people. You've got to sustain the will of your people to continue to fight this trade dispute.
Okay. There's a student question, I think. Let me go to this. Did you have a question?
So my question pertains to this administration has started to pull funding from Palestinian-affiliated organizations even like the UN WRA, if I'm saying that correctly. And my question is, I want to understand the effects that has not just on Palestine, but countries that host Palestinian refugees, specifically Lebanon. And I was wondering if that, because since Lebanon is such a dynamic and it's almost like a match can start a fire there, right? I want to know if this could be that match.
Well, potentially. They are in a very tough neighborhood, as you understand. But I guess if I'm understanding your question, can the trade disputes or his pulling funding from Palestinians? I think you really look at what happened during the Intifadas and the isolation of particularly the West Bank and the Gaza during the Intifadas and everything else. What you see, in my humble opinion, when you see good economic times, you see great cooperation. That's why I say all the time, develop a business class, develop markets, do all those kinds of things, develop all that kind of stuff for people to be able to work together and come together. But certain leaders, Yasser Arafat comes to mind, said that destroys my message long term if everything is going well and we're all cooperating. And so the Intifadas, I believe, were used to try to break down that cooperative spirit. It's a really tough neighborhood right now, as you say. Boy, I'll tell you what, with Syria and all the tribal factions and everything else and everything going on, it could turn into a conflagration very quickly, in my opinion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add that the U.S. government tried for decades to broker peace in the Middle East and came close a few times. The Camp David Accords were successful in their time, but then they fell out over time. And the U.S. was able to do that because we were trying to be an honest broker. We tried to maintain the trust of both Palestinians and the Arab world and the Israelis. And we had both sides' trust for a time. And I think it's sad that we've given that up. We're no longer pretending to try to broker peace. We're now 100% on Israel's side. And I don't know why the Palestinians or the Arab world would trust us to try to help mediate any kind of peace there. And that's a loss.
I'm going to go on to related, but another Twitter question, and it is related to what we're talking about. This student or this individual asking, what ways does President Trump's foreign policy make it difficult for diplomats to do their work? Or I guess we could say, or how does it help?
Yeah, sure. I left in 2014, so I missed Trump administration. But I spent a lot of time with the State Department, so I talked to colleagues who are doing it every day. The Foreign Service is a neutral, nonpartisan organization. The job of the U.S. Foreign Service is to give the president the best advice they can, and then to carry out the orders. And I think they're very good at that. People will resign over principle, and they did during the Balkans, they did during Iraq, but very few. Most diplomats are professionals like lawyers. They're just trying to defend their client's interest and do the best they can for them. And they're still trying to do that. The most difficult thing for the U.S. State Department diplomacy now is that the system of foreign policy has flipped completely. Mm-hmm. It used to be that the foreign policy mechanism, the institutions would devise a policy, work on it hard, and the president would announce it. So when the president announced something, it was a result of a deliberation. What's happening now is the president announces foreign policy, and now the establishment has to try to figure out what he meant by it and implement it. So it's upside down. And so what we tell our foreign partners all the time is, yes, President Trump's tweets are important, but please stand by while we try to figure out exactly what they're supposed to mean. We'll get back to you.
Anybody follow up? All right, follow up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next topic, which somewhat deals with what we've already been talking about. And that is the U.S. role in international diplomacy. In the first page of his book, President of the Creation, former Secretary of State Dean Acheson describes the pre-World War II international system by saying, in September 1939, soon after war broke out in Europe, a bitter debate engulfed the United States. One side, led by an organization called the America First Committee, proclaimed traditional isolationist views. The other rallied around something called the Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies. World War II left half the world in shambles, and it was the United States and its people who led the rebuilding efforts. efforts, which included the birthing of a new international legal regime that would aid in the rebuilding, and created institutions like the United Nations, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, NATO. This new international system, which was created by the United States and headed by the United States, has lasted all of these 7 decades. Ambassador Tokol, I'd like to go back to you as the person on our panel with the diplomatic experience. President Trump's America First foreign policy seems intent, as we've been discussing, on upending the international orders that we ourselves created. Again, he's criticized the UN, threatened to withdraw from NATO, has withdrawn from the Human Rights Council, from UNESCO. Do these moves weaken or strengthen the United States' influence in the international affairs in the eyes of the world? And what impacts may they have on the fabric of multilateralism that we created 70 years ago?
How much time do you have?
Yeah, you've got 30 seconds.
We have never had anything other than American first policy. Since George Washington, every foreign policy has been America first. It's how you define it. What is our long-term interest? A lot of previous administrations thought America's interests were tied up with the international order and institutions and systems. So we've never given up the idea that we're here to protect the United States. Okay, that first. Second, I refer you to the President Trump's UN General Assembly speech. Really take a look at that thing and read it, because it's an important statement. He's coming forth with a theory of international relations. What the president said was globalization should be resisted. We should not be bound by any international rules. Every country should be wholly sovereign and should pursue its own self-interest. If every country does that, we'll have a world at peace. That's what he said. I think there's three problems with it. First, it was not true within even his own statement, because he called for regime change in Syria and Iran. So he's not adhering to the idea of non-interference. The second problem is we've had no historical example of that system ever working. Europe, for hundreds of years, had wholly sovereign countries pursuing their self-interest at war for hundreds of years, because self-interest often conflicts with other countries' self-interest, and you get into a fight. And that's not just history. I've lived in 2 parts of the world, the Balkans and the Middle East, where countries were wholly sovereign, not adhering to international rules, pursuing their own interests, and they were killing each other. So I don't think that historical model works. The third problem with the statement is other countries don't buy it. The Russians and Chinese don't like that idea of wholly sovereign countries pursuing their self-interest. If you read Russian and Chinese foreign policy, what they say is regional spheres of influence. That in the countries around Russia, countries around China, they must look after the national interest of Russia and China. They're not allowed to have sovereign self-interest. So the United States has never gotten along with spheres of influence. We've always opposed it. So neither Russia or China want to have this world the president's portraying as what his goal. So I don't see it ending well.
Mm-hmm. And Colonel Lewis, let me go to you. I mean, this whole idea of spheres of influence, particularly of Russia and China. Just last month, Russia had these largest war games since the Cold War, and it actually invited China to join them. I think China contributed maybe 3,000 troops to these war games in Russia. Could we say that it's the America First policy of President Trump that is in some sense driving China and Russia closer together in sort of a natural alliance? Is that what's happening? Is that a danger here?
You know, I want to agree with my colleague here. When we talk about regional hegemons, I think that's very important to China especially. I don't read too much into this particular war game. Relatively small. In exchange, what China really wants is the S-400 surface-to-air missile, which technically or theoretically has some anti-stealth capability, which they will then probably reverse engineer and crank out mass quantities of that. So again, the politics makes some interesting bedfellows here. I don't know that it's an alliance militarily that we need to get overly concerned. The big challenge we see with Russia right now, again, trying to assert itself on a world stage, trying to bring us back to that first world, second world, third world, Cold War order here, and nothing that Putin would like better than to see that. But the reality of their economy, I think, keeps them from ever really getting to that. And they don't have a compelling message, I think, necessarily that resonates to try to bring people into their camp. So is there an alliance developing? Yes. Is it a strong military alliance? Not necessarily. I think China's interest in the South China Sea and the Spratlys and everything else probably way overrides anything that we should see with Russia at this point.
And Dr. Bologna Pavlik, I'd like to kind of continue with this line of questioning. Although the world has in fact been saved from the scourge of another world war, we have seen international conflicts arise from time to time, which have been described as proxy wars, particularly the ongoing civil war in Syria, the Russian annexation of Crimea, Russia's continued intervention in eastern Ukraine. And do you believe that these issues are leading to a more stable or less stable world in the sense of reducing the risk of military conflicts? That is, again, this idea of not just America first policies, but nation first policies.
So that's a very complex question, and I wish I had the answer to that. I wouldn't probably be here if I did. So a couple answers. I'm not the military expert up here, but I did see kind of an interesting poll. And I want to start this with basically the idea we haven't lived in a world like we are in right now for a long, long time. It used to be that the United States was a global leader, and even if other countries didn't exactly believe in what we were doing, they thought we had the right idea. But there is a poll, and it's interesting, this poll was in 2014, so these trends have happened before the Trump administration. It was a poll of Europeans where basically they started to say they didn't really believe in what we were doing anymore. And so what we've kind of been currently doing is staying out of conflict a little bit more than we used to. We have South Korea building up their own military, whereas before we would have stepped in and protected them. So in terms of stabilizing or not stabilizing, it's not clear that if we do something, it will be a stabilizing force, given that the view of America seems to have changed. But it's also probably not a good idea that we have all these countries building up nuclear weapons and things that we haven't seen in a long, long time, at least since I've been alive. So be kind of an interesting future here.
It is a dangerous world. I mean, I think going back to what Ambassador Tokala said, on the one hand, and Dr. Murphy, I want this question to go to you. On the one hand, President Trump has said that not only should America have America's interests at heart, but each nation around the world should have their own interests and the interests of their people at heart, and that in fact creates a strong constellation of governments that will lead to a peaceful world. But as Ambassador Tokala said, at the same time, he criticized certain kinds of regimes, and particularly when after communist regimes and socialist regimes, saying that basically they had produced suffering, corruption, and decay. Specifically, he pointed to Venezuela, which has incredible problems. You've written a recent book called Choice, Cooperation, Enterprise, and Human Action, and in that book you argue that free economies provide a solid foundation for civilizations in general, and that entrepreneurship and innovation are keys to a strong national economy. So from your experience in writing that book and the research you did in that book, do you think that President Trump's America First policy is consistent with the economic analysis that you provide in your book? And if not, what advice would you provide him?
So my general view on these types of things is that it's both inhumane and counterproductive strategically to do economic sanctions on a particular country as a general rule. And so the reason, so why am I saying it's inhumane, is that if like some particular government leader is doing something that the U.S. government doesn't like, and you just say, okay, we're going to vastly interfere with trade into that region, it's mostly, the regular people, especially the poorer ones who suffer. It's not so much the guy in the presidential palace who's going to suffer from that. But even putting that aside, people say, hey, this is serious business, and sometimes, there's collateral damage. But even putting that aside, I think it gives the person we're trying to isolate with that policy can then plausibly say to his people, oh, the reason you're starving is because the U.S., is blockading us. So of course it's their fault. And I've even seen this on that scientific outlet called Twitter that some of you are aware of, where I honestly asked, I said, look, this is textbook economics, that in Venezuela they're running the printing press and they have price controls. Any normal economist knows that's going to lead to shortages. And in case you're not aware, I mean, they're literally starving. There's no toilet paper. They're having to go to adjacent country. I mean, it's really bad. And again, I'm not exact. A lot of times they say, oh, that's economics 101. This literally is economics 101, and it's astonishing how can this last so long. But people defending the regime of Hugo Chavez and so on were chiming in and saying, oh, no, that just, they said oil prices fell and it's, the U.S. is punishing them. And similar with Iran. So last thing I'll just say is the best example of what I'm trying to get across is with the treatment of Castro. That those punishments were in place for decades. It obviously didn't unseat him, and yet, and I know people who were socialists who were looking forward to visiting Cuba, and I was like, okay, well, go look around when you get there, and their explanation was, well, yeah, look at how well they're doing despite the punishment of the U.S. regime. And so again, I think that the best thing to do, if you don't want to sell them weapons, okay, that's fine. But just saying in general, to try to punish a country through trade, I think is counterproductive, and actually, has the people rally around the leader.
I'm going to go ahead and move on to our fourth and last topic, which is discussion of the administration policies with regard to refugees and immigrants coming to the United States. In a similar way that we talked about the United States creating a multilateral system for trade, in some sense, we had a proud tradition of resettling refugees that goes back to the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, admitting refugees not just from Germany but Italy and Spain. During the Cold War, we accepted refugees from Hungary, Poland, Yugoslavia, and other communist regimes. After the fall of Vietnam, we resettled hundreds of thousands of displaced Indonesian refugees. But recently, last month that is, the Trump administration announced that it would admit no more than 30,000 refugees to the U.S. in 2019, down from the current cap of 45,000. And in addition to that, at his UN speech last week, he announced that the UN would not sign on to the Global Compact for Migration, which is basically a draft agreement recognizing that no country can manage international migrations on its own, and that it needs international cooperation to seek a safe and orderly migration and reduce human smuggling, human trafficking. Ambassador Toko, I'd like to start with you. This recent announcement to reduce the cap of refugees and basically is no confidence vote for the Global Compact for migration seems consistent with the American First agenda. That is, we're going to work on we need to create and keep jobs here for Americans and not others. It also seems to lead. Seems to follow from a growing anti-immigrant bias around the world. We see anti-immigrant parties with growing influence in Germany and Sweden and Italy, Poland and other countries. Does this America First policy reflect a change from our historical role as a leader in establishing this leadership role in refugees? Or are we becoming a leader with a different focus?
Yeah, I'm largely going to punt on the question because I don't claim to be an expert in immigration policy. I know something about refugee policy, but I don't want to say too much about it.
Right.
All I will say is about the Global Compact on Migration, that I took the time to read it because I knew you'd ask about it. And I'm not sure the administration actually read the thing before they rejected it. Because what does it actually say? The Global Compact Migration says that nations are independent and sovereign. They can have whatever immigration policy they want, and they can enforce it any way they choose to. It goes on to say that the purpose for the compact is to share information. about the roots of migration. They want to have an international conversation about why migration happens in the first place, what drives people to leave their homes. They want to have a conversation about how to document migrants, which should be in our interest. Everything the Global Compact calls for are things that Secretary of State Pompeo has said we should do, which is try to focus on the problem of the outbound countries and to try to have a system for regulating refugees. So I guess the problem is it has 3 words in it the president doesn't like: Global Compact and migration. But the agreement itself, I think we should sign it. It makes perfect sense for our policies.
Dr. Murphy, President Trump has defended his policies on restricting refugee and immigration admissions on economic policy grounds. So maybe that's where he's coming from, is even though there's not particular requirements on how many people we might want, or no requirements on who we might want to let in, he's claiming that immigrants and refugees take American jobs and impose serious costs on the American taxpayer. As an economist, do these criticisms ring true, and would an influx of refugees or immigrants really harm the economy, given that we're almost at full employment, and given reports, at least, that are out there that say refugees and immigrants actually have a positive impact on the economy?
Okay, so this is a big topic, obviously. The person who's really the expert on this is our colleague at the Free Market Institute, Ben Powell, has written a lot on this. But just for our purposes here, it's really difficult. So there's 2 competing things. If a bunch of immigrants come into a certain region, it's true that that's more workers, and so gee, as the supply of labor goes up, doesn't that push down wage rates? And yes, if that were the only thing, but then on the flip side, there's more consumers buying stuff. And so that tends to push up, the demand for products. And so it's not obvious just thinking through that simple armchair reasoning, and I am in an armchair, which way the outcome comes. And by the same token, look, there's 100 million more people now than there was, a century ago, and that doesn't prove that, well, gee, now that we have all these more people in the United States, just because they were born and grew up and population grew internally, that there's not enough jobs and we're all starving and that's pushing down rate. No, we're much richer now than we were. So the mere growth in the number of people in an area per se, it doesn't automatically follow, oh, gee, that obviously pushes down wage rates. It's hard in general empirically, and it's a lot of this, economists can prove whatever they want. I just want to let you guys in on that. And they're not even lying. That's what's even more interesting, because there's so many things going on, so many variables, you can just focus on the certain ones, and then the answer is going to be. So there are reputable empirical studies on both sides immigration costs blah blah blah, and other people say no, they're actually net contributors, and it's not that one side is lying and the other one isn't. It just depends on the things they're looking at. I think it's fair to say, though, the ones that are the most carefully controlled, like there's certain international incident, like where a bunch of people were allowed to come into Miami, for example, for political reasons. And then, economists can look at, okay, what was the labor market like right before, and then soon after, where it's kind of like a controlled experiment. And there, it looked like, yes, it pushed down the wage rates of unskilled workers a little bit, but a few years after, that effect had faded away. So that doesn't mean if you just had open borders that would be the same thing. We don't know, but I'm just saying in terms of it's hard to have a controlled experiment, and I think it's certainly it's not a huge move one way or the other, put it that way.
Can I
Yes, please.
add a few things? So he is correct. Our colleague, Dr. Benjamin Powell, is one of the experts on this, but I want to just kind of highlight a couple areas where Dr. Murphy said economists get different results, and just get a little more specific. So it depends on the type of migration you're talking about. You can have lower skilled immigrants come in, and they serve a specific role in an economy. A lot of researchers have found that they actually free up some resources for women and increase the native workforce of females, and actually increase employment in that specific category. But then you can look at other areas such as high skilled immigration that have different effects. So basically, to sum up what he's saying, there's a whole bunch of different categories. You can't just say immigration in general. There's all different kinds. Another area that Dr. Powell's getting into a bit more, and I myself am getting into, is the new economic case for migration restrictions. So there's a group of economists that are proposing to limit migration. And their case is that these immigrants are coming in with social capital, and it's different from ours. And they're worried that they're going to deteriorate our institutions, so market structures and different things. Basically, the research so far on that from Dr. Powell and myself, I study crime and corruption. There's no evidence of that. And if anything, the immigrants that are leaving their countries are the ones that don't like the social capital that was there. They want to escape it. But those are just a few other things to think about.
Thank you very much. And I think, was there a student who had a question? Yeah, come to the microphone.
So in the history of the United States Supreme Court justice appointments, the kind of point was to allow for a depolitization of the process so that these justices could act away from the political process and kind of be away from that. So recently with the appointment of Justice Gorsuch and with the current attempt at appointing Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, has that clear politicization of the process compromised the worldview of the United States judiciary system and the view of Americans for the judiciary system as well? And if so, how can that be remedied?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. It's really interesting. When I was at the embassy in London, we polled British high school students in the London area. And we asked them the question, what do you admire most about the U.S. and what do you admire least or criticize the most? So the thing that this British students criticized the most was gun culture. They didn't understand that at all. The thing that they were most impressed by was the U.S. judicial system. That's kind of surprising. You think it'd be engineering or science or something else, but no, the thing they admired was the U.S. judicial system. So it's been a absolute pillar of the American system, is having that third pillar of the judicial system function neutrally and professionally. And so, yes, I worry a great deal about what's happening with the politicization of the Supreme Court. I don't know how to fix that. But I was very disturbed to hear the candidate, Kavanaugh, describe entire groups of people as being a group. The liberals are out to get me. The Democrats are lying about me. He didn't allow even the possibility that there might be a Democrat who actually just wanted to find out the truth. You know, sure, there's a lot of ill will there, but this falling into tribalism on both sides is very disturbing. I wish we could get away from it.
I think it only gets worse, unfortunately. We live in the day and age of revenge politics, and I think it only gets worse. If the Senate could do anything right now, it would be to fix what I clearly see as a very broken process right now because it is so highly politicized here. There's no way to determine where truth is in any of this, and I think everybody retreats to their camps at the end of the day, and unfortunately what goes around comes around. And I made the comment somewhat tongue-in-cheek last week, but maybe not. Will we ever see another Supreme Court justice appointed? Kind of a scary thought.
Well, as I think the only lawyer on the panel, I think you've done both done great jobs in addressing that. I think the one point to keep in mind is, look, as human beings, we all have biases. And I think one of the great things about the American judicial system is, particularly the federal court system, is that our judges are renowned, I think, internationally, as Ambassador Tokla has said, for having this incredible judicial temperament. But at the same time, you know, politics has been a part of the Supreme Court, you know, for quite a while. I mean, even if you go back to the Brown versus Board of Education case, right? I mean, there was a lot of politics involved in how that decision came about. So, you know, depending upon your perspective, you know, the politics is a part of the system, but the judges themselves do have to at least maintain some veneer of judicial temperament, and I think maybe no, I don't think maybe. I think the line was crossed in this recent confirmation hearing, where, as Ambassador Tokola said, there was an attack, direct attack made against a particular party. And I think that the criticism should have been made by the politicians and not the candidate, or not the nominee, I should say, not the candidate, but the nominee for the judicial position. So I think I will leave it at that.
Yeah, one footnote on the international part of it. People don't realize how much international jurists actually talk to each other. It's not just in completely isolation. Every year, the U.S. Supreme Court meets the European Court of Justice to talk about what's new happening in European law and American law. And if you look at one of the really key decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court, the Boumediene decision, was a terrorism case. The U.S. Supreme Court cited British case law in 13 examples as precedent. So the legal systems are there's more of a permeable barrier than you expect.
We've got about 5 minutes left. I don't want us to monopolize the last 5 minutes. Are there any other student questions that we need to address? Yes, go ahead.
So my question would just be like, I've noticed like in a lot of the time, especially near the start, you guys were sort of talking about a like dynamic of U.S. before Trump and U.S. after Trump. Now, I'm not an expert on this, obviously, you are the experts, but to me that sounded kind of strange. Like, has the U.S. really been consistent before Trump? Is Trump really such a huge change for us to say, like, Trump is the only reason that all of this is weird, or has the U.S. had lots of change before, and we're just sort of focusing on it because Trump is a little bit weirder in many ways?
The only thing constant in politics is change, right? So I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but, the pendulum swings back and forth, and I think the 2016 election highlighted some of that pendulum movement. We are where we are. I guess Winston Churchill, paraphrasing him, says the American people always get it right after first exhausting every other possibility. And so maybe there's some hope for us out there somewhere. We'll see. I tend to watch what they do rather than what they say. And I think that's the most important lesson I could tell you today is watch what people actually do, see what policies actually get put in place, see what's working, see what's not working, see what adjustments be made, and then kind of ignore all the screaming and rhetoric and everything else on every other dimension. That would be my advice, having lived through numerous administrations.
Yeah, I think you're right in the premise of the question. There's something bigger going on. This is not about Donald Trump personally. He's much more of a symptom than a cause, because it's global. The Brexit in the UK, Hungary's move away from democracy, Xi Jinping making himself dictator for life, Turkey moving away from democracy. So there's a global phenomenon going on. There's some kind of a globalism, nationalism thing happening that I can't explain exactly what it is. I don't know if it's technology or too long a period of peace or backlash against something. I'd like to figure out what it is. It's not just here.
We've been talking in my classes for at least the last 10 years about the rise of European nationalism, especially, without quite understanding the cause. There is some relationship with refugees and the European nationalism. There's some relationship there, but I'm not sure exactly what the causal part. But I've always taught in my classes it's how to fight and win wars. Be cautious of the rise of supranationalism. It has never turned out well in the world when that has occurred. So,
Yeah, if I could just jump in. So I agree that was a great question to say. So certainly, especially I do a lot of work on energy policy issues like the CAFE standards and the Paris Accord. So certainly, just even from the perspective of people that are working in the Department of Energy or the EPA, the personnel choices, there was a big shift. And I don't just mean going from, the Obama administration and then instead of it being in Clinton to Trump, like even compared to what would have been under like a Mitt Romney or, John McCain, that sort of thing. So it was a pretty radical shift in terms of the people that were getting placed in key posts. But yeah, I think the issue is more not that Donald Trump single-handedly came in and did that, but yet why was the American electorate, ready for something like that? not that I'm endorsing it, but I think part of what's going on, it's not merely, oh, we're against globalization, or there's people who are against it, but this idea that there's this technocratic elite that have been kind of running things since World War II, and it was kind of all right for a while, but then, more and more people are saying something's not right with this, and, blaming that for the loss of manufacturing jobs, and, other things like that, where it seemed like the experts were saying, no, we're running these multilateral organizations, and we got it under control. We're the smartest guys in the room, and then I think part of what Trump is a backlash against that.
And I think that's probably a good place to end, and it really is kind of what you brought up. I don't think that this is about any particular one person. It's about sovereign power. And we have to remember in the United States, who is the sovereign? The people ultimately are sovereigns. You are the sovereigns. You vote for the President of the United States. You vote for every official. So ultimately, it's going to be in rooms like this where you're educating yourself, where you're involved in these kinds of civil discussions to learn about the issues, the impacts they have, that our government policies have on our lives and on the world. And so in that sense, I think the one great thing that we can take from this is to remember you are the sovereigns, and you have to continue to be involved in your government and involved in discussions like this. So we thank you very much for joining us. We thank those of you who are joining us on the television, and we hope to see you again. Next semester, we'll have another civil counterpoint.